When a seed is sown deep within the earth, it is germinated over time, tensions, and toils. But just before dawn, you can see the extent of its birth and growth. You see, I am that seed. My journey has been bittersweet. I have been groomed by legendary hands that no longer walk the earth. But I have been covered by angelic wings who have been fortified around my existence, and how they have groomed me on every side, patching holes like patching holes in galaxies, but they've never let me fall. Now I must admit that there were times when I felt as if I was all alone. There were times as if I felt as if I could never pick my own self up. And there were times where my faith became extinct. And how I looked for mortal men to be the extension of my Creator, only to come to the realization that I had to run back to my Creator. So when you see me today and you hear my story, please understand, I stand because I am finally arising to see who I really am in God. And I'm doing it just before dawn.
So my birth happened in Colorado Springs on the Fort Carson Army Base. I'm told I was out there in the mountains when my dad was on the military base. Because once he went away to basic training and my mom found out she was carrying me, there was one plan, but my granny said not so. So you need to write him a letter, tell him y'all getting married. So there's that story. And the Veal family lived on the third floor of the building while the Hammond family lived on the second floor. So my dad's parents were upstairs and my mom's parents were downstairs. And I don't remember anything about Colorado myself because they went back to Chicago when I was 6 months old. So being raised in Chicago, there's the good times and the bad times, I would have to say. I would think the bigger memories were before my grandmother passed when I was 8. Living where we lived, the whole neighborhood was family oriented. I do remember that. And eventually my dad's family moved in the building next door. They built a new building next door. And so they moved out of that building to next door. So it was kind of cool to be able to talk to my cousins from the second floor window in the breezeway. That was pretty cool. I do remember my mom's 2 younger sisters, one being 13 months younger than her. So when she was in college and I was still a little girl, I would go to Chicago State University a lot. That was kind of cool. And then the younger sister is exactly a week and 10 years older than me. So my aunt, she was like a big sister to me. So the high school I eventually ended up going to on 82nd and Vincennes, that was the high school she went to. So I got to go to Simeon long before I actually went to Simeon. That was kind of cool too. So we, for one, when I was really little, actually when my grandmother passed when I was 8, we were living in the basement of the church that we all grew up in. Big Mama and her husband were the church custodians. So there was an apartment in the basement of the church that we lived in. Mount Moriah Missionary Baptist Church at 6352 South Eggleston still stands to this day. It is definitely still a pillar of the community. The pastor that I grew up under, Reverend O.C. Nix, passed in 2013, but it is who we all came under and through. And he was so well known that I remember the Southern Baptist Convention, when it came to Chicago, it was always there. And it would always be all these big coach buses pulling up from different cities and states with choirs. And I grew up in a big church with a big choir. And I remember always having been in the choir, even from the Sunshine Band all the way through my teenage years. And then even after that, eventually we moved out of the basement of the church to the building across the street. But we were still planted and anchored at Mount Moriah. And I remember nothing but church as a little girl. Because my grandmother was on my great granny actually, was on every auxiliary in the church. I can remember, like back in the day when you had specific families that did specific things in the church. So there was a Sunday that we had the kitchen, and there was, the usher board, the mother board, the choir stand. If you were to see the inside of Mount Moriah today, it has been restored to the original work that Big Mama did upstairs in the sanctuary.
So you touched on some of the memories of being a child, and you talked about being raised in Chicago. You talked about the people that influenced your life. What about your mother? What was that like?
The times that I spent with my mom, I would have to tell you one of the bigger things, even as a child, would be admiring how she always had what they call the baddest crib on the block. I can remember times when the model apartment was her apartment. Like literally she had this agreement with the leasing office because she always had this nice stuff. And I say to this day, I think that's why I try to emulate that. But I can remember we lived in a building not very far from the church during the time that my grandmother was sick. And she had a best friend across the hall named Lorraine. Her and Lorraine were so close, they really called each other sisters. So Lorraine's kids and I grew up like cousins. And we still are to this day. I can remember, I think one of my first that's going to be one of my first memories really of spending time at my mom's house. Because I always had a room in my mom's house and it was always real nice. The Christmas that I remember last, ironically turned out to be the last Christmas that my granny was alive. I remember that tree. I always had a white Christmas tree. So my mom has me to this day. If I get a tree, it's going to be a white one until I got a silver tree to match my house. But I remember that year, almost everything I got for Christmas. And I know my mom went and did the shopping, but I know it's because my grandmother was making a memory. I just wasn't aware of it that young, if that makes any sense. But yeah, we had a really nice apartment. I can remember music being planted in me as a result of my mom. She had this beautiful stereo that had these lights in it. And I was so in love with that thing. But one of the things I think that was ingrained in me to adulthood was she was a lover of music. So I still have all of their music in me and then all of my music in me all wrapped into one. I can remember times when my mom and I would sit up and laugh and play late at night. It's one of the things me and my son and my grandkids did and or do. I can remember spending a lot of time in the living room at night with the stereo on and just letting the music play and dancing and having fun. Or up watching movies. I got a couple of old movies in me that are a result of my mom. It Happened One Christmas. That was her favorite Christmas story. What's the other movie? Imitation of Life. One of her favorite stories. To this day, one of mine. Just remember my mom always being, the one that went out and had fun and had the cool car and, things like that. I used to look at her. I remember there's a photo of her and I wish I had it. She had on this white jumpsuit. She had an Angela Davis afro. She was in her probably early 20s. I was like, she's so pretty, but she looks just like her mom. I can remember the night they got the call to go to the hospital. I was with Big Mama, but she picked me up and took me back to the apartment building and left me with Auntie Lorraine. And I can remember her coming home probably about 4 or 5 in the morning. She came to get me. And she said, Granny's gone. And I think I just went numb because my grandmother went from crutches to a wheelchair to bedridden. And I was a little nurse even back then. I would go reposition her leg because she had muscle atrophy and things like that. And the last I saw of her was probably in April of that year. Or it might have been March. By the time we get this call, it's June. So back then, children couldn't go to the hospital. So last I saw her, she left in an ambulance. So when she came home and told me that, I think I kind of went into a shell. I remember later on in the school year, though, one day I'm in class, and something just said, you're never going to see your granny again. And they couldn't get me to stop crying, so they called Big Mama and was like, you don't need to come get her.
How did your mom take her death?
I think she internalized it. I don't think she ever properly grieved. And to be honest with you, I think she's still angry at God about that.
Why you say that? Did she act differently after?
Absolutely.
And what does different look like?
The angry became angrier. There were suicide attempts. 3 of them. And unfortunately, it was me that found her every time. First time I was 14.
And when did Granny pass? How much time before that?
I was 8.
So do you think that she tried it because
she was carrying everybody's stuff? Yeah. And because the circumstances surrounding my grandmother's death that are a lot deeper than just physical things, but supernatural things that were later determined. I'll just say this to any and everybody at this point because I'm in ministry, right? We know that God has his angels. But we got to know that the enemy has his too. And there is a such thing as people deciding how to figure out how to harm somebody out of jealousy. And the truth of the matter is that jealousy came from inside my Mariah.
So Grandma didn't die of natural causes?
Well, medically they had a term for it.
What is it called medically?
Muscular dystrophy.
But spiritually it's what?
Witchcraft.
So you think somebody was out to really?
Yep. And it was actually brought to the forefront before she passed. And there is a deeper level of it that my mom experienced alongside Big Mama. That's why I say her siblings don't know everything she carried. She was sworn to secrecy.
So if somebody was listening to this, And maybe they're dealing with, how do they know it's witchcraft? What are, you know what I mean? Like, because there's so many things we know that the enemy does. But how can they listen to this story and be like, man, you know, how do I pray for my family? Or how do I confront?
It was determined because a good friend of my grandmother's who worked with her noticed her going from this limp to these crutches to this wheelchair. And she kept saying to her, there is a bishop in Chicago. It was a church that she went to. You need to bring her to the altar for prayer. You need to come to the altar for prayer. And once she got in that wheelchair, she was pleading with my family, like, you guys need to bring her to the sanctuary, to the altar for prayer. They did eventually. And I want to say, honestly, about a week ago, I think I determined that I must have been there that night. Because there's certain parts of that I remember. And I do remember her being in the line in the wheelchair, and when she got to the front of the line to be prayed over, I remember him saying, take her downstairs to the healing room. Now I'm almost certain I was left upstairs in her friend's care while they went to this healing room. In this healing room, a certain thing took place, and my great-grandmother and my mother and my grandmother swore each other to secrecy, because once it was revealed that had taken place, and he literally told her exactly how it had been done, she had entrusted someone to sew some of her clothes. He said, go in her closet, and he described it to a T. Had never been to her house. Pull back the curtain, because back then you would string a curtain across a doorway that didn't have a door. Pull this dress out and look at the hem. They sewed a patch into the hem of her clothes.
So it was witchcraft.
The other side of that is eventually, years later, when my families were together, that's why I say it's uncommon for your parents' families to be so close. But if we took a loss on one side, we took it on the other side. So my dad's siblings took it just as hard as my mom did. When they heard this story years later, they were like, if you had told us, because they were from Louisiana, we would have put Miss Hammond in the back of the car and drove down to the bayou and took care of that. Literally. But there is a story regarding that particular healing room that only my mom knows. Big Mama eventually told me at 16, because I think with her having known, because my grandmother was telling me what my dreams meant at 7 years old. We had a neighbor who committed suicide, and my grandmother's window was on the back part where the alley was. And I had told her of this dream I had, and she called me in the room and she said, come here. Ambulance had got there and they were taking the guy out. She said, you see that? I said, yes, ma'am. She said, what you dreamed the other day was this. And she always taught me, if you dream about a man, it's a woman. Once she passed, no one really wanted to deal with my gift, especially not her mom, because she had just lost her only child who had the same gift. In my later years, I learned so does my mom. And it's very powerful. But I think she has decided against her gift because of that situation.
So, how did your mother ever help you with your gift?
She hasn't. Because I think she does not want to tap in at all. It's too painful for her.
So how did things progress after the death of your grandmother? How did your relationship build? Did it get stronger? Did it endure?
Not with my mom. With my aunts. Like the one that was like a big sister to me. I remember when she taught me how to ride my bike. I remember she was the one that took me to the park. We walked everywhere. If I could do that now, I would lose this weight. We walked absolutely everywhere. The park was forever away, but we did it all the time. I remember being on 72nd and Vincennes, and I'm riding down the block, and as long as she's holding the bike, I'm good. Until one day I looked back and she had let go, skinned my knees up for show. But I got on and did it again. And I remember that my uncle, actually there were two of us when my granny died. I was 8 and my little cousin was 2. because my uncle's girlfriend lived at the other end of the block. So this whole block was family over. And so I remember those were like cousins to me as well. So we all played together. My mom, you could almost see the wall that was built. And it was for everybody. But again, I say as an adult, now that you sit back and you look at things in hindsight, as a kid, I wouldn't have gotten that, right? But I get it now. And I think a lot of her not wanting to be at home and wanting to be out and about and do what she did and have her own way was literally just an escape plan for all that she was carrying. It was books for me. So I went to school and I stayed on the honor roll. I stayed a spelling bee champ. I did like all that stuff.
So she went to work,
Mm-hmm.
and in between going to work, other family members watched you?
Correct. And I pretty much lived with other family members. Yeah. Because they didn't actually move out of that apartment until, I think my aunt, who was 13 months younger than my mom, graduated from Chicago State. And she started teaching. She was teaching when I was 2. And I remember being in Head Start, reading to my class. Because at 2 years old, I was reading. My aunt was an educator, so they wouldn't let me slip through the cracks at all. I remember spending a lot of time, especially summers, with them. And again, by the younger one being 10 years older than me, it was like my big sister, right? And I was the child she didn't have until I was older myself, She went away to Chicago State. And whenever the family, that's about 90, no, she went away to Northern Illinois University. DeKalb is about 90 miles outside of Chicago. So whenever the family went to visit her and her husband, it was always, I'm staying at Darlene house. Like, I'm not going home. I'm staying with them. Mm-hmm. I would spend summers there. I think finding out at some point that it's okay to not be okay is definitely a game changer. I think I spent a lifetime and definitely all of my childhood thinking it must have been something wrong with me because they didn't want me. And I kept trying to figure out how to do all these amazing things so I could be seen by both my parents. I came to the conclusion one day that at some point this has to stop being about them seeing you and just be you. It definitely was a game changer when I had my son, because then things stopped being about me and started being about my son. And I remember being so overly protective of not becoming what I had in parents. I took my son and out of counseling when he was maybe about 8 years old, because I wanted to be sure that I wasn't being that parent. So we had individual therapy and then came together. And I remember the therapist saying, your son is a happy, healthy 8-year-old. And the fact that you are overly conscious of not becoming the disconnect that you had, she said, it's a good thing because it keeps you from being it and makes you a great mom.
So why do you feel like you still need the validation?
I don't know if that just comes from the childhood that still needs that. I can remember being probably in my 30s when one day I had to face an 8-year-old that was myself and tell myself that I'm sorry for what I put you through, and really come to the terms with loving me. But I do remember being prostrate on the carpet, and I heard God so clearly. That small, still voice, because he's not going to yell at you.
Right.
He said, they didn't want you, I did.
Mm-hmm.
It went through my soul. And when I tell you, things just begin to pour out of me.
That poison.
Yeah. That I have been carrying since I was a child.
Right.
The validation that he gave me. And at that point I decided, well, God, if this is what all the hell was for, then so be it.
Right.
Because if I can tell this story and save one person,
Right.
and say, when you in it, it does not feel like you're going to come through it. And because of that history, and because I know that that is a generational curse in my family, the hardest thing in the world is to not go down that rabbit hole and not be able to pull myself out.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing I've taught my son is I have to get up every day and tell myself I'm okay.
Mm-hmm.
And keep it moving. You can come out, and you can come out okay. And when you realize a lot of times what you go through has nothing to do with yourself, it's for somebody else. Keep saying it. Father God, we come before you now, first of all, to say thank you. Because, Lord, sometimes it does not feel when we're in the valley we can come through this pain. But, Lord, if we just recognize that you are standing there, you are with us, you are beside us, and that there's no place that we go that you are not. Even when we felt alone in a cold, dark place, you were right there. And if we would just stand firm and go through the storm to get to the other side, we'll find you standing there with your arms open wide. And Lord, we know that you don't need us to pray a prayer. You don't need us to sing a hymn. You don't need us to do anything but come to you with this pain, with the questions, God, because you have every single answer. If we would but understand that you wrote the story of our life from the end back to the beginning, and then we took our first breath, that meant everything in the middle, which is the dash. You knew all about it before we even knew. So there's nothing, God, that we go through that you don't know is already coming. So for that, we can praise you, God. And if we can just praise our way through the pain, if we can praise our way through the anger, if we could just trust you, if we can come to the understanding that most of the time the question on the table from you is, do you trust me? If we could just understand that even like Job, the enemy has to come to you and ask for permission to do the things that he does. And that sometimes it's not even the enemy, but it's you, Lord, saying, do you trust me? If we could just trust him enough, because he said we only need faith the size of a mustard seed. If we could just go in Hebrews 11 when we are in that pain and know that now faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. If we could just stay there and stay firm and know that you are God and that all by yourself. If we could just know that you sit high and you look low, God, and you know all about it, from every hair on our head to the soles of our feet. If we could just place our cares upon you. And God, I'm not saying it's easy. To that man, woman, boy, or girl that's listening right now, I'm not telling you it's easy. I'm not even telling you it's easy for me now. But I know that what his word says is true. And if you would just find your way to him and trust him, someday you'll be telling your story to save somebody else's life. So just tell the Lord thank you. Because this pain may not even be for you. Amen. Okay.
Hey, I am Prophetess Sandy Love, and I am the host of Give Voice to Pain. This right here, I carry this baby. Put some thought into it. I come to understand that everybody has a story. And not everybody wants to share this story because oftentimes humanity will make you feel bad, make you feel as if you're cursed or that you come from the wrong side of the track. But the truth is, if you're ever going to become your authentic you and walk in that authenticity, there's a good, a bad, and an ugly. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. And can I tell you something? So many of you have survived, and you're afraid to tell your story. Can I just encourage you that your story will encourage somebody else? Give Voice to Pain wants to be that platform. It wants to be that platform that we will do what we call a mini docuseries. It is a whole season with so many episodes that we're just going to allow you to share your story. We want you to be open and mature enough to take our questions. And if we hit a bump in the road, allow God to minister to you where you are. This ain't for show. This is because some of you need healing. And sometimes we can't get healed because we feel as if we don't have the voice or the platform to speak our truth and to speak our voice for fear of retaliation or some low-minded, low-class individual wanting to splatter it on the airwaves. That's not what we're about, and that's not why we're here. So I tell you what, if you live in the DFW area, me and my staff would love to come and do a small docuseries on you, give you a whole season, and let's pick out the tragedies and the triumphs, the challenges and the perseverance, and then let's get the wisdom so that people can eat from it. Email us at engage@voice2pain. Engage@voice2pain.org. I'm waiting on you.